The numbers were wrong, and I had known it for 6 hours before anyone else bothered to check. I had the war maps open on 3 screens. The Keth Dominion's forward lines had moved 14 light-years in the past 8 weeks. The Vral Ascendancy had responded by pushing their secondary fleet into the corridor's southern edge. Both sides were draining each other, and neither of them seemed to notice or care that the map of their current trajectories pointed to a very specific location. My location? Our location? My name is Maya Reyes. I am Commander Ambassador, Earth Diplomatic Presence, the only human being currently stationed aboard Galactic Council Relay Station 14. My official title takes longer to say than my job description requires. What I do, in plain language, is this. I sit in a waiting room the size of a small moon. I file reports that nobody reads. I attend council sessions where I am handed translated pamphlets and referred to as a representative of a Tier 7 developmental species, which means, in council language, that we are smart enough to be watched but not important enough to be consulted. I had spent 6 years in this position. 6 years of sitting in that waiting room, filing those reports, smiling at those pamphlets. I had gotten very good at patience. Marines get good at patience. You learn it in the waiting, not the doing. But the maps were wrong. The numbers did not lie. And at 0300 station time, someone besides me finally noticed. The knock at my office door was not a knock. It was a series of rapid, bioluminescent pulses against the door panel, the Vorkai equivalent of someone hammering with both fists while trying to appear calm. I had been stationed long enough to read the difference. The regular pulse meant a standard visit. The rapid, slightly erratic pulse I was seeing now meant the kind of visit people receive right before things stop being routine. I opened the door. Envoy Shai stood in the corridor. Shai was a Vorkai, which meant 6 limbs, a body like a green-blue flame frozen into physical form, and bioluminescent skin that broadcast emotional states whether they wanted it to or not. Right now, every inch of Shai's skin was flickering in a pattern my translator marked as something it could only render as distress, elevated, involuntary. Ambassador Reyes, Shai said. Envoy Shai, I said. The High Council requests your presence. Not tomorrow. Not at the next scheduled session. The way Shai said requests made it clear that this was the kind of request that had already considered and discarded all the alternatives. Give me 2 minutes, I said. I closed the door, picked up my jacket, checked my sidearm out of habit, unloaded, locked, regulation. Then I stood in the middle of my office for exactly 4 seconds and looked at those 3 maps. The Keth Dominion's lines. The Vral Ascendancy's response force. The corridor stretched between them like a throat, and at the far end of that corridor, sitting in the path of 2 civilizations worth of escalating catastrophe, a small yellow star with 8 planets orbiting it. The 3rd one mattered. I put on my jacket and went to see what the most powerful governing body in the known galaxy was scared about at 3 in the morning. The council chamber was not built for humans. It was built for the 47 species who had founded the Galactic Council 2,000 years before humanity had managed indoor plumbing. The seats were wrong, the lighting was wrong, the air was processed to a chemical mixture that satisfied most species present and left humans with a faint taste at the back of the throat like aluminum and old libraries. I had brought a water bottle. I always brought a water bottle. There were 32 species represented in the chamber that night. Every seat was filled. That had never happened in my 6 years. Emergency full sessions were rare. Emergency full sessions at 0300, with every seat filled, meant that something had gone past the stage where people could afford to send deputies. I took my seat at the outer ring, the designated position for developmental species observers. A pamphlet had already been placed there. I did not pick it up. The first voice opened the session. The first voice was a Taurus the Elder, the oldest of the Council's founding species, ancient enough that her species had stopped measuring age in years and started measuring it in geological events. She spoke slowly. Not because she had to, because she had learned, across a very long life, that people listen more carefully to things that are not rushed. She explained the situation. The Kethral conflict had entered its 41st year. 11 star systems compromised. 3 inhabited worlds lost, not destroyed. The first voice said this carefully, and I had already read enough classified reports to understand what lost meant in this context. These were not worlds that had been reduced to rubble. They were worlds that had been erased backward, retroactively removed from the fabric of existing space-time by something the reports called probability collapse munitions. 3 worlds that had been there, and then, from the perspective of physics, had simply never existed. The Council was issuing a corridor exclusion zone. Every fleet, every diplomatic vessel, every observer presence within the projected conflict radius was ordered to withdraw immediately. Effective in 48 hours. She looked at me when she said, "Every observer presence." I asked the question I was supposed to ask. What is the threat radius? A Council aide pulled up the star chart. The projected exclusion zone spread across the display in a wide amber sweep. I looked at it. I did the math the same way I had done it 6 hours ago at my desk, from different data, arriving at the same answer. "That is not the outer corridor," I said. "That is our solar system." The first voice held my gaze. Approximately. The chamber was very quiet. I sat with that word for a moment. Approximately. As though the gap between the exclusion zone and Earth's sun was a rounding error, a minor technicality, a thing not worth specifying more precisely. "I will relay the Council's directive to Earth immediately," I said. "We appreciate your cooperation, Ambassador." I picked up my water bottle. Did not drink from it. Set it back down. The session moved on to the formal language of the exclusion order, the procedural logistics, the timeline. I sat in my outer ring chair and watched the proceedings and kept my face in the configuration I had learned to use when I needed to appear to be present without revealing what I was actually doing. What I was actually doing was remembering everything I had just been told, all of it, in order. Because, in 30 years of military and diplomatic service, I had learned one consistent truth about the moment when very powerful people are very frightened. They tell you just enough. And what they do not tell you is always the more important half. Then it happened. An aide, moving fast through the procedural documents, opened the wrong file on the shared Council display. A document appeared on the screen at the front of the chamber. It was long. It had a classification header I had never seen before. The text was dense and formatted in the Council's standard threat assessment structure, 47 numbered categories running down the left margin. At the top, the subject line read, "Species Designation, Human Threat Assessment, Annex 7, Crimson." Someone shouted a command in Torathi. The screen went dark in under 4 seconds. But 4 seconds was enough. I had been trained to read fast. I did not let my face do anything. I left the chamber at 0445 station time, walked back through corridors built for species with different footfalls, past viewports looking out at the black, past the long rows of developmental species offices where 9 other Tier 7 representatives had already packed their things and were preparing to comply with the exclusion order. I went back to my office, sat down at my desk, opened my secure channel to the United Nations Interstellar Liaison Division, stared at the blank message field, typed 3 words. They showed me, sat there with my hands in my lap for what might have been 30 seconds or might have been 10 minutes. The war maps were still open. The math was still the same. I added 4 more words. We need to talk. Then I sent it and waited and watched the numbers on the map keep moving in directions that had never once been good for anyone. The meeting was supposed to happen in Geneva. I asked for it to happen at the UN Interstellar Liaison Building in New York, a glass tower on the east side that most people assumed was an ambitious tech company. They agreed. I took a shuttle that followed its flight path as standard diplomatic transit, landed at an airfield in New Jersey that did not appear on civilian maps, and was in a conference room on the 41st floor by the following afternoon. The man waiting for me across the table was Philip Adler, Secretary General of the United Nations. He had the face of someone who had been sleeping 5 hours a night for about 3 years. He had also brought General Owen Marsh, who commanded Earth's Joint Interstellar Defense Initiative, which officially did not exist. Owen Marsh had the kind of face that made officially does not exist feel like an understatement. Also present was Dr. Neil Farrow, senior physics consultant, whose name I recognized from an abstract I had once seen attached to a theoretical paper on compressed space event horizons. He looked like a man who had recently discovered something that made him extremely interested in other subjects. I sat down. I put my water bottle on the table. I began. I told them about the corridor exclusion zone. I told them about the 48-hour withdrawal window. I told them about the 3 erased worlds and the 41-year war and the probability collapse munitions that were currently being used across 11 star systems. I told them that the exclusion zone approximately covered Earth's solar system. Philip Adler wrote something down. Owen Marsh did not move. Neil Farrow looked at his hands. Then I told them about the second thing. Annex 7, Crimson. I told them what had happened. The wrong document. The open display. The 4 seconds before someone killed the screen. I told them what I had read. I did not tell them what I had felt reading it. That was mine. The summary line from those 4 seconds was not long. It had lodged in my head like a splinter, and I could reproduce it word for word. Do not engage. Do not provoke. Do not, under any circumstances, allow this species to develop a context in which violence is justified. Owen Marsh, after a pause. And their specific concern was escalation pattern consistency. Their specific concern was that they have 60 years of data on every conflict humans have been involved in, all the way back, and the escalation curve is always the same. Slow start, then nothing, then everything. And their analysts cannot find the point where it stops. Because it doesn't, Owen said. Not as a boast, as a fact. The way you state weather. That was their conclusion. Yes, Philip said. But it does. We stop. We do. Eventually. They noted that too. I picked up my water bottle, set it down. Their concern was the word eventually. And what happens between the start and the eventually? The room was quiet for a moment. Neil Farrow cleared his throat. Can I ask what the delivery mechanism is for the probability collapse munitions? Is it a ship-based system or a station-based? That is not what we are here to discuss, I said. He closed his mouth, opened it again. No, I know. We have been modelling the theoretical framework for about 8 months, and the core question is whether the collapse horizon is directional or 8 months, I said. He stopped. I looked at Philip. 8 months, I said again. Philip had the expression of a man who had known this moment was coming and had not enjoyed the anticipation of it. The war has been moving toward our sector for considerably longer than 8 months, Maya. We watch things. It is our job to watch things. You didn't tell me you were watching. You were in Council Station. The communication protocols? You didn't tell me, I said. Simple. Final. Moving on. I had been in the diplomatic service long enough to know when to win an argument and when to file it and keep going. I filed it. How far along is the modelling? I asked. Owen answered. The Kithral engagement pattern has been fully mapped. We have projected outcomes for 7 different escalation scenarios. In 3 of those scenarios, the probability collapse zone reaches the outer edge of our solar system within 18 months. And the other 4? 6 months. I sat with that. 6 months. 18 months. The far edge of our solar system. The place where, technically, Earth's interest became Earth's problem. The Council's exclusion order, Philip said carefully, covers combat configured and diplomatic configured vessels. I know what it covers. It does not specifically address. I know what it doesn't cover, I said. I read the same order you did, Owen. Non-combat. Survey configured vessels. No weapons on manifest. Operating in an observation capacity. There is no language in the exclusion directive that... I know, I said. I know there isn't. I was thinking about the summary line from Annex 7, Crimson, the one I had read in 4 seconds and carried across the transit to New York into this room like a stone in my coat pocket. Do not engage. Do not provoke. Do not, under any circumstances, allow this species to develop a context in which violence is justified. If we send observation vessels, I said slowly, we need to understand what we are doing. Observing, Owen said. We are showing up, I said, in a place where 2 civilizations that are afraid of us will suddenly have to think about us. That is what we are doing. Philip leaned forward. Is that bad? I thought about it. Truly thought about it. The way you think about things when the answer matters. I don't know, I said finally. What I did know, and did not say out loud, the Council's fear was not that humans would attack. It was that humans would be given a reason, a context, a justification, and then the escalation curve would do what the escalation curve apparently always did. But there was a second thing the 60 years of data had not quite captured, or had captured and filed under the wrong category. We were trying to prevent that curve. Every time, we had never once, in all of our history, decided to be dangerous on purpose without first spending a long time trying to find another way. We were just not always fast enough. And now 2 civilizations were 6 to 18 months from someone's backyard. I'll go back to the station, I said. I'll comply with the exclusion order formally. I'll file the diplomatic paperwork. And, Philip said, and I want 12 ships. Survey configuration. Civilian registered. Crew of 12 per vessel. Maximum. Scientists, medics, engineers. Owen, we can have them ready in 3 weeks. Good. I picked up my water bottle. Drank from it this time. There's one more thing. I put the summary line on the table. The annex said, do not allow this species to develop a context in which violence is justified. That means the council knows we need a reason. They have been very careful for 60 years not to give us one. Philip, what is your point? My point is that being near that war, being present in that corridor, might feel like a reason to us. If any of those weapons get close enough, the room was quiet. So we need to be very clear, I said, about what we are going out there to do. Owen, observe. And, a pause. Observe, he said again. Only observe. I looked at him for a long moment. Owen Marsh was not a man who said things he did not mean. He was also not a man who said all the things he meant. All right, I said. Neil Farrow, very quietly, as I reached the door. The collapse horizon, is it directional or radial? I stopped, did not turn around. I genuinely do not know, I said. But I suspect you will figure it out. I left, took the elevator down, stood on the sidewalk outside the glass tower for a moment in the November air, which was cold and clean and smelt like exhaust and something cooking from somewhere nearby. 6 to 18 months. I went back inside and started filing the paperwork. The 12 vessels were ready in 3 weeks. They were survey ships, the kind that planetary science teams use to catalogue asteroid belts and atmospheric conditions. They had been fitted with long-range scanning arrays, medical bays and communication suites strong enough to reach the council station from the far edge of the solar system and beyond. Their manifests listed scientists, medics, engineers and one diplomat. I was the diplomat. I was also the only person on those 12 ships who had read Annex 7, Crimson. That was intentional. I had thought about it carefully and decided that 60 years of alien anxiety was mine to carry until I understood what to do with it. The crew of my vessel, the Persistence, survey configuration, civilian registration, included Dr. Neil Farrow, who had apparently convinced someone he was essential, which he probably was. It also included Dr. Diana Cole, chief medic, who had spent 12 years treating patients in conflict zones and had the particular calm of someone who had run out of things to be surprised by. And it included our pilot, Colin Burke, who had flown combat drops in 3 different Earth engagements and now officially flew survey missions and did not discuss the previous work. And Envoy Shy, who had been assigned as Council Liaison to the Earth Observation Mission, and who had, upon receiving this assignment, apparently asked their superior 3 times to confirm it was not a clerical error. It was not a clerical error. Shy arrived at the Persistence's dock with 2 bags and the bioluminescent pattern of someone who had made their peace with a difficult outcome. Envoy, I said. Ambassador, Shy said. I want to note, for the record, that I am here voluntarily. That's in the filing. I also want to note that I have read all available documentation on Earth's military and diplomatic history. Good. All of it. Good. I have some questions. You can ask them in transit, I said, and we boarded. The transit to the corridor took 11 days. In those 11 days, Neil Farrow ran calculations I did not fully follow. Diana Cole organised a medical inventory that she updated 3 times a day. Colin Burke flew the ship with the quiet precision of a man who had stopped finding long distances interesting. And Shy sat across from me in the briefing room and asked their questions. They were good questions. The Vorkai were natural analysts, pattern seekers, and Shy had spent 30 years watching species navigate conflict. They asked about Earth's decision-making processes, our chain of command, our historical approaches to presence-based deterrence. I answered what I could. I was careful about what I could not. On the 7th day, Shy asked the question I had been waiting for. Did you read the file? I looked up from the map I was studying. Which file? The one on the display screen. In the chamber. Shy's bioluminescence was steady, controlled, but there was a flicker in the secondary patterns, the ones that were harder to mask. I was standing next to the aide who opened it. I saw your face when you read it. You read it. I set down my pen. Yes, I said. And we are on our way to the corridor. Shy considered this. That is not an answer. It is the only answer I have right now. There was a pause. Shy's bioluminescence settled into a colour I had learned to read as something between acceptance and unease. The Council's assessment of your species has been a classified document for my entire career. I have never been permitted to read it. I know. You read 4 seconds of it. Yes. Was it? Shy paused, choosing the next word with care. Accurate? I thought about Owen Marsh, saying it doesn't stop, with the flat certainty of a man quoting a physical law. I thought about Neil Farrow's 8 months of probability collapse modelling, filed under theoretical research, running quietly in parallel with the most advanced development division Earth officially did not have. I thought about 3 erased worlds, and the math, and 6 months. Parts of it, I said. Which parts? The parts that matter, I said. And I picked up my pen and went back to the map. And Shy sat with that answer for the rest of the transit and did not ask again. We came out of the faster-than-light corridor on the morning of the 12th day. I was on the bridge when we dropped out. Colin had his hands on the controls with the loose grip of someone who trusted the ship. Neil was behind me with a scanner running before the visual feed even cleared. Diana was at the med station. Because Diana was always at the med station, the corridor opened in front of us on the main display. And on either side of it, like 2 walls of a canyon made from metal and firepower, the fleets I had read the numbers in reports. 230 Keth vessels, 209 Vral. Numbers are one thing. What the display showed was something different. Something that sat in the chest differently than a number on a page. 439 warships, class after class, weapon systems that could erase a world backward out of existence, lined up across from each other with 40 years of dead between them, waiting for the moment when the next exchange would begin. And our 12 little survey ships, floating at the edge. Open hailing frequencies, I said. Colin looked at me. He did not say anything. He opened the channel. The Keth fleet's response came in 14 seconds. Unidentified vessels. You have entered an active conflict zone. Identify and withdraw immediately. I clicked the transmit button. This is Commander Ambassador Maya Reyes, Earth Diplomatic Presence. We are here in an observation capacity. We will not interfere with any operations. We are going to stay out of your way. A pause. A longer pause. Then Shy, standing just behind my left shoulder, said very quietly, "Ambassador, the Keth Historical Archive cross-references your species designation. They are looking at your file right now. I know they will read the threat assessment. I know. And then, I know Shy. I kept my eyes on the display. Let them read it." The Vral hailing frequency opened 12 seconds later. Different voice, different accent through the translator. Same words. Identify and withdraw. Same response from me. Then, silence. The 439 warships sat still. We sat still. 12 survey vessels and 12 humans, and one very concerned Vorkai diplomat, floating in the gap between two civilizations that had been trying to destroy each other for 40 years. And for the first time in 40 years, both of them stopped. Not because of our weapons. We had none on manifest. Not because of our fleets. We had 12 survey ships. Because of the file. Because of 60 years of watching and the summary line and the question neither side could answer, which was this: what happens if these people decide this is their problem? Neither side knew. Neither side could finish the calculation. And in the gap of that unfinished calculation, both fleets sat still and waited to find out what we would do. I turned to Neil. "Start your scans," I said. "Everything. All the data you can pull." He was already working. I turned to Diana. "Pull all distress signals from the engagement zone. Both sides. File rescue requests through council protocols." She nodded. Started filing. I turned to Colin. "Hold position." "Holding," he said. I looked at the display for a long time. The two walls of the canyon, sitting still, watching 12 small ships and doing the math they could not finish. Shai came to stand next to me. "What are we doing?" Shai asked. "We are observing," I said. "And we are standing here," I said. "That is the whole plan. We are standing here. For 11 days, nobody fired a weapon. I had been prepared for a lot of outcomes. I had run the scenarios on the transit over, the way old habits run whether you invite them or not. I had prepared for hailing, for negotiation requests, for demands to leave, for attempts to board our vessels, for the kind of accident that is not actually an accident. I had not prepared for 11 days of nothing. The first 3 days, both fleets stayed at combat positions. Weapons hot, shields up, formations maintained. They watched us, the way two large animals watch a third animal enter their territory, with a stillness that is not peace. It is the stillness of recalculation. We worked. Neil Farrow collected more data in those first 3 days than the combined output of every xenophysics department on Earth in the past decade. He stopped sleeping. He started talking to himself. He stopped talking to himself and started talking to the data in a running low murmur that the ship learned to treat as background sound. The probability collapse residue in the region was extraordinary, he said. A record. He said extraordinary, the way other people say horrible, with a particular quality of understanding and grief folded together. Diana filed rescue requests through council protocols for 14 damaged vessels in the engagement zone, both Keth and Vral. She submitted medical assistance offers. She got no responses for the first 2 days. On the third day, one Vral vessel, a small courier caught at the edge of an earlier engagement with a crew of 9, sent a single-line response. It said, "What do you want in exchange?" Diana looked at it for a moment. Then she responded, "Nothing. We have what you need. Tell us where to dock. Another pause. Then, acknowledged, Colin flew us to the docking coordinates. Diana and her team went aboard. 3 hours of work. 9 crew members, 2 with injuries Diana classified as serious. We stabilized them. We transferred supplies. We left. The entire Vral fleet watched us do it. I heard later, through Shy, through council back channels, that the Vral fleet commander spent 4 hours reviewing the sensor logs of that medical stop, looking for the catch, running the numbers on what we had gained. We had gained nothing. We had given supplies and time and gone back to our observation position. He could not make sense of it. I could have explained it to him, but he did not ask. The Keth side sent their first communication on day 4. Not an official channel, a narrow band frequency that required Neil's scanner array to detect at all. 3 sentences. Translated and delivered to me on a slip of paper because Neil thought it was important to hand things like this to a person physically. It said, "How long will you remain in the corridor? What are your operational boundaries? What is your threshold of acceptable provocation?" I read it 3 times. That last sentence. Threshold of acceptable provocation. They were not asking what it would take to make us leave. They were asking what it would take to make us act. They were trying to finish the calculation. I sent the response through the same narrowband frequency. 3 sentences. I wrote them out 4 times before I sent them, looking for the version that was most honest. We do not have a predetermined timeline. Our operational boundaries are the survey zone. We have not determined our threshold. 3 minutes of silence. Then the Keth channel closed. Shy found me in the briefing room an hour later. "You told them you haven't decided." "Yes." "Is that true?" I turned the pen over in my hand. "Yes." "That is," Shy said carefully, "either the most honest, diplomatic communication I have ever witnessed or the most calculated. Can it be both?" I asked. Shy's bioluminescence did something complicated. "With your species," they said, "I am learning to assume yes. Days 5 through 8 were defined by a particular quality of waiting that I had felt before in other circumstances, in other kinds of corridors. The waiting that happens when 2 sides are tired. When the thing that started the conflict has been in motion so long that neither side can fully remember how to stop it, but both sides are beginning to feel the weight of how much stopping it would mean. I recognized that weight. I had felt it from the inside. On day 6, the Keth and Vral fleets shifted positions, just slightly. Not toward each other, not into weapons range. They spread laterally, widening the gap between their formations, which created a small but measurable increase in the distance between them. Neil flagged it in the data stream. "Both fleets moved," he said. "I see it." "They moved away from each other?" "Yes." "Not by much." "No," I said. "Not by much." But it was the first movement of those fleets that had not been toward each other in 40 years. In the data, it looked like a small thing. 14 degrees of arc. A slight adjustment. I wrote it in my log as Day 6. Both fleets reduced forward pressure 14 degrees. Small. It mattered. On day 8, the Keth commander sent a second message. Same narrow band frequency. This time, it was longer. It said, "We have reviewed your species' historical record, including the Council's archived assessment. You have been in conflict many times. You have sustained significant losses in each engagement. You always continue. Our analysts cannot find the point at which you assess the cost as too high to proceed. We need to understand. Is there such a point? I sat with that message for a long time. Neil came in, read it over my shoulder, and left without saying anything. Diana came in 10 minutes later, read it, and sat down across from me. What are you going to say? She asked. I don't know yet. Is there a right answer? I looked at the message again. I think the honest answer is the right one. What is the honest answer? I picked up my pen. I wrote the response. I read it back to myself once. It said, yes, there is such a point. We have not always found it in time. We are trying to find it faster. That is why we are here. Diana read it. She was quiet for a moment. Send it, she said. I sent it. The response from the Keth commander came 40 minutes later. One line, we will consider this. That was day 8. On day 9, Shai told me that back-channel communications had opened between the Keth and Vral commands, not through the council, through a frequency that both sides were apparently using to speak to each other while officially pretending they were not. How do you know? I asked. Because I have been doing this for 30 years, Shai said. And the particular quality of two forces that have started talking to each other is very specific. The positioning changes. The scan frequencies shift. The maintenance cycles on forward weapon systems get extended. They paused. Also, I have a source. Of course you do. The source says the discussion is preliminary, but it is happening. I looked at the display. The two walls of the canyon still sitting there, still facing each other, but the gap between them was wider than it had been on day 1. Not by much. Enough to notice. 40 years. 11 days of us standing here. On day 11, Philip Adler opened a secure channel from New York. It was morning there. He looked like he had not slept, but that had been his baseline for so long I had stopped reading it as significant. The council has made contact, he said. Formally, through official channels. They are asking if Earth would be willing to serve as the transit point for a joint Keth-Vral mediation request. I set down my pen. They want us to carry the message, I said, between two species that have not spoken directly in 40 years, yes. They are apparently both willing to talk. Neither is willing to be seen initiating it. The council believes that a neutral transit, neutral being a strong word. I understand why they chose us, I said. Philip's expression shifted slightly. He knew, and I knew, and we both knew, the other knew. Will you do it? I looked out the viewport. The corridor, the two fleets, the space between them that had, in 11 days, become very slightly wider. Yes, I said. Maya. Yes? He paused. Then, what is it like out there? I thought about how to answer that. The weight of 439 warships watching us. The 14 degrees. Neil talking to Data in the dark. Diana handing supplies through an airlock to 9 crew members who had asked what we wanted in return. It is quiet, I said. That is the strangest part. It is very quiet. I closed the channel, turned around. Shai was standing in the doorway. Their bioluminescence was doing something I had not seen before, a slow, even pulse, not distress, not calculation, something calmer than either. Ambassador, they said. Yes, I have been a council diplomat for 30 years. I have been present at 18 ceasefire negotiations and 9 full peace conferences. They paused. I have never seen a conflict pause like this. Like what? I asked. Like it wants to, they said. I looked at them for a moment. Go get some sleep, Shy, I said. We have a message to deliver tomorrow. I went back to the display. The canyon, the gap, the 14 degrees of space that had not been there 11 days ago. I picked up my pen, wrote in my log, day 11. Both sides have agreed to talk. They are not calling it that yet. They are calling it a preliminary communications review. But it is talking. 40 years, and they are talking. The message was delivered on day 12. I carried it across the corridor in a shuttle with a council-registered transponder, because when you are carrying a 40-year conflict's first peace inquiry, you do it in a vehicle that nobody will fire on over a procedural technicality. Colin flew. Shy sat in the co-pilot seat and read diplomatic language aloud to no one in particular. I sat in the back and drank from my water bottle and did not think about very much. The Keth command vessel was the size of a city. I had seen large warships before. The shape of the Keth flagship was designed to communicate something very specific. Solidity, permanence, weight. The kind of vessel that wanted you to understand before any conversation began that it had been here longer than you and would be here long after you left. We docked. We were escorted through corridors built for a species with 2 fewer limbs than humans and an extra joint in the knee, which made the walk a specific kind of interesting. The Keth honor guard moved with a fluidity that suggested they did not have to think about it. I moved with the fluidity of someone who had practiced not looking like they were paying attention to everything. The Keth commander met us in what the translator rendered as a receiving room. His name was Voratha, and my translator noted that the name contained a phonetic element meaning persists. He was the kind of figure that made you recalibrate the room around him, not because of size, because the Keth were not particularly large, because of stillness. He had the stillness of someone who had been at conflict for so long that the conflict had become his resting state. I handed him the formal communication. He read it. He looked at me. You are the human diplomat, he said. Yes, you have been in the corridor for 12 days. Yes, and in that time, you have not made any demands. You have not made any threats. You have not claimed any authority in this matter. No. Why? He said. Are you here? I had thought about how to answer this question since day one. I had run through versions of it in my head the way you run through a route before you walk it, looking for the problems, the places where the ground was not solid. Because this conflict, I said, is 11 days from our solar system. And we decided to come see it before it came to see us. Voratha looked at me for a long time. The council file on your species, he said, is very detailed. I know. You have read it? Parts of it. Then you know what it says. Yes. And you came anyway. Yes. He looked at the communication in his hands, then back at me. The Vral have agreed to preliminary talks. I know. I carried the same message to them an hour ago. What did their commander say? He asked me the same question you did. Why are we here? And I gave him the same answer. Voratha was quiet. His stillness had not changed, but something in it had shifted. A slight variation in quality, the way a very long pause changes meaning depending on what it follows. Your species, he said, is a great unknown quantity in this quadrant. I know. The council is afraid of you. Yes? Are you afraid of yourselves? The question sat in the air of the receiving room. Shy, behind me, had gone very still. I took a breath. Sometimes, I said. That is part of why we are trying to get better at this. He nodded once. I will submit the communication. We went back to the persistence. The ceasefire request was formally filed through council channels on day 14. Joint submission, Keth and Vral, requesting immediate council mediation under the corridor non-escalation framework. The language was careful and technical and had the specific quality of something that had been argued over by many people before anyone agreed to sign it. It was a ceasefire request. 40 years, 2 civilizations, 11 star systems, and 3 worlds that physics now insisted had never existed. And 12 survey ships that had shown up and stood there and done nothing except stand there. The council convened an emergency full session 3 days later. This one was different from the 0300 session that had started all of this. The room had the quality of something that had been dreading a thing for a long time, and had now arrived at the moment when the dread had to become a plan. I sat in my outer ring chair. The pamphlet was there. I picked it up this time. It was the standard corridor situation update, version 44, which meant they had been updating it regularly for 44 cycles. I read it. It was already out of date. The first voice opened the session. She acknowledged Earth's observation mission. She acknowledged the joint Keth-Vral communication. She used careful, measured language for all of it, the language of someone framing history in a way that will look reasonable in the archives. Then she looked at me. Commander Ambassador Reyes, she said. The Council extends its formal appreciation for Earth's role in facilitating this preliminary communication. Thank you, I said. Earth's observation mission exceeded the terms of its non-combat mandate in several respects. Medical aid was provided to vessels of both parties. Communications were conducted directly with fleet commanders outside Council-mediated channels. I waited. The Council has reviewed these activities and has elected not to classify them as violations of the corridor exclusion terms. That is generous, I said. The Council is practical, she said. Results matter. The first voice moved to the formal agenda. The ceasefire structure, the mediation timeline, the composition of the negotiation body, all of the procedural architecture of turning something that had been a war into something that might eventually become a peace. I listened. I took notes. I asked 3 questions and saved the rest for the filing. At the end of the session, an aide, a Tarathi junior diplomat who moved with the careful precision of someone very aware they were in a room with a lot of history, placed a data file in front of me. The Council has issued an updated assessment of Earth's diplomatic designation, she said. You are now classified as a Tier 4 observer species with limited consultative standing in corridor region affairs. Thank you, I said. There is also, she said, and paused for just a moment, a revised version of the species threat assessment, filed under the same reference number as the previous document. She left. I looked at the data file. Shai, to my right, was looking at the same file. Are you going to open it? They asked. Later, I said. You are going to read it alone. Yes. Shai considered this. That is probably wise. I put the file in my bag, sat through the closing formalities, said the right things to the right people, waited until everyone was gone. Then I sat alone in the outer ring chairs of the council chamber and opened the file. I read the updated threat assessment. I read it slowly. All 47 categories. The new data points pulled from the observation mission, the analysis of our actions in the corridor, the medical aid, the communications, the positioning of the 12 ships, the 11 days of not doing anything except being present and being watched. I read the new summary line last. I read it twice. Then I put the file away, stood up, and walked out of the council chamber. I did not let my face do anything. I had learned that in a different room, in a smaller conflict a long time ago. The transit back to Earth took 11 days. I slept more on this transit than the last one. Not because things were settled. Nothing was settled. The HFY mediation was barely started, and peace talks take years, and collapse and restart and disappoint and sometimes hold. Nothing was settled. But the math was different. The numbers on the war maps had stopped moving in the directions they had been moving. 6 months had become a negotiating table. 18 months had become a ceasefire framework. That was something. That was enough to sleep on. Neil was writing a paper on the probability collapse residue data. He had been writing it since day 3, and it was already 300 pages long, and he said he thought it would be important. I believed him. I also believed it would cause approximately 7 separate international debates in the physics community, but that was a problem for later. Diana held a medical briefing on day 7 of the return transit, reviewing the Vral treatment data. She had, in 3 hours aboard one damaged courier vessel, established Earth's first direct medical exchange with an alien species. She presented this with the same expression she used for quarterly inventory reports. Colin flew. He always flew. Shai sat across from me in the briefing room on day 9. Their bioluminescence was steady, the calmest I had seen it since the original 0300 knock on my office door. I have been thinking, Shai said. About what? About the council's old assessment, the summary line. I kept my expression level. What about it? The line said, do not give this species a context in which violence is justified, because the fear was that if you had a reason, the escalation curve would do what it always does. Yes, but in the corridor, you had a reason. Your solar system was in the projected engagement zone. That is about as strong a justification as a species gets. Yes. And you sent survey ships. Yes. Shai was quiet for a moment. Why? I turned my pen over in my hand, set it down, because we had been on the other side of that curve, I said, and we remember what it costs. Shai absorbed this. That is not in any of the council's models, they said. Memory as a moderating variable. No, I said. I suspect it is in the new file. Shai looked at me carefully. You have read the new assessment. Yes. What does it say? I picked up my pen again. I thought about the new summary line. The words I had read twice in an empty council chamber and carried back across 11 days of transit in the same place I had carried the old one. It says we are learning, I said. Shai sat with that. Their bioluminescence shifted slowly through several colours I had no full translations for. Then they said, Is that enough? I looked out the viewport. The stars moving past in the long blur of the transit corridor. Earth, somewhere ahead, getting closer. I don't know, I said. I think it is the most honest thing anyone has ever put in a threat assessment. I recorded my final mission log that night. Standard debrief format, coordinates, timeline, mission outcomes, personnel notes, recommendations. I was thorough. I was professional. Then I stopped the recording and sat in the quiet of the small office on the Persistence with the lights low and the ship humming around me. I thought about the new summary line, the exact words, the old line I knew by heart. I had been carrying it since a council chamber at 0300. Threat potential, not military. Threat classification, psychological. Mechanism of action. The species is aware of what it is. They carry the knowledge of their own ceiling as a tool. Do not engage. Do not provoke. Do not, under any circumstances, give them a reason to find out if they are right about themselves. The new line was different. Not entirely different, but 5 words had changed, and 4 new words had been added in a way that shifted the meaning of everything that surrounded them. The new summary line read, threat potential, not military. Threat classification, active and evolving. Mechanism of action, the species is aware of what it is and appears to be working on it. Do not engage. Do not provoke. Do not give them a reason to find out if they are right about themselves. Current assessment, they are not sure they are right either. This uncertainty is their most significant characteristic. I sat with that for a long time. The Galactic Council, with 60 years of data and 47 analytical categories and the resources of the most powerful governing body in the known galaxy, had arrived at the same place I had arrived at in a conference room in New York, looking at 3 war maps and a blank message field. We did not know our own ceiling. And that, somehow, was the thing. Not that we were powerful. Not that the escalation curve was real, though it was. Not that we had a history and a creativity in conflict that apparently concerned the oldest species in the quadrant. It was that we were trying. Every conflict, every corridor, every mission, we were always, underneath everything, trying to find a different answer. We were not always fast enough. We had not always found it in time, but we had stood in the corridor for 11 days. We had sent 12 small ships and a diplomat with a water bottle and a physicist who talked to his data, and we had stood there and it had been enough. I started the recording again. Personal addendum. Commander Ambassador Maya Reyes. Return transit, day 9. I looked at the stars outside. The blur of them. The distance collapsing. The new file says our most significant characteristic is that we are not sure about ourselves. I paused. I have been thinking about whether that is a weakness or something else. I have not finished thinking about it. What I know is this. The Keth and Vral are going to sit down in 6 weeks for their first formal mediation in 40 years. 3 worlds are not coming back. The people on those worlds did not get a corridor of survey ships. They got the other part of the curve, the part that does not stop in time. We are learning. The file says so. I hope the file is right. I picked up my pen at the start of all of this, and I have been setting it down and picking it up again ever since. In corridor stations and council chambers and small rooms on ships in the middle of a conflict that almost became our conflict. I held the pen in my hand, looked at it, did not put it down. In lock, I turned off the recorder, looked out the viewport for a while. The stars, the blur, the distance shrinking. Then I picked up my notebook, actual paper, an old habit I had never stopped, and I opened it to a blank page and I started writing. Not a report, not a log, not a diplomatic communication. Something honest, something true, something I would decide later whether anyone else needed to read. The pen moved across the page in the quiet of the ship and the quiet of the dark outside. Earth was 12 hours away, 11 days to get out there, 11 days to get back, and in between, a war that had stopped long enough to think about whether it wanted to keep going. We had stood there. That was the whole thing. We had stood there, and it had been enough. This time,